the surreal is something that is just going beyond the real, or what we conceive as real. But it also questions the real. So in your life you can have several moments that appear as surreal because you're losing the logic of the situation and things seem to be almost a fantasy or something different. And I think it's always good to question the status of what we conceive as real. It's like people, it's like how people make a distinction between nature and culture, you know? Or can you really make that difference? We talk about nature as if it were something outside of ourselves, as if it's the fauna and flora, as if it's the plants and the animals, and it's there, and as if we are not part of it. So I think even the most poisoning factories are part of nature. And I have the same feeling with real and surreal, and that it's something quite vague and questionable. And that's interesting, I think, that an exhibition can make you reflect on what we conceive as real or not real, or fantasy, or fantasized, or surreal, like on another level. It's like making the distinction between something rational and something emotional. It's also not so easy to do, because like what we sometimes consider as a rational decision can be a very emotional one. And so all these these couples, like real and not real, nature versus culture, emotion versus rationality, it's what you start to question when you launch a title like From Real to Surreal. You start to question what we consider as logical distinctions, but maybe they are not. And I think in this image, of course, it's very real, but then again, it's a staged image, so it's not real. So this balance between what we consider as real and what we could consider as staged or composed or artificial is also a good subject, I guess. I'm not at all afraid of emotion in artistic work, because for a certain while emotion was something considered as not done and ridiculous in artwork. Like we have had decades of very formalistic art, art about art, you know, painting about the gesture of painting, and it still exists today. It's this kind of modernist, not postmodernist, but modern or modernist approach of questioning the medium and talking about the brushstroke or the act of splitting a stone. And so we have had a lot of art that really talked about art and its form and its appearance, but that didn't really talk about life anymore. And to me, it's really, really important to talk about life and to have the emotion in there. So, for example, one of the largest works I produced is called Location 6. It's a big panoramic construction where you can sit down as a spectator in an observatory and you're entirely surrounded by an infinite snow landscape, which is entirely sculpted. I sculpted it with my assistants. And it's a very both peaceful and melancholic experience to sit in there. And many people told me that they became emotional when they were sitting in this illusion or in this space that I created. And I'm always happy when I hear that it moves people, because it's also what I hope to experience when I go to the cinema, for example. I want to be moved by the content and by the characters, and when I leave the cinema, I want to look at the world with different eyes. So, and this is also somehow an aim for me in my work to, it can be very discreet, like the production I did here will be very banal and very low-key. But at the same time, I try to explore the emotion, how we can relate to the subject. It's important for me that the spectator can identify him or herself with the image, say like, oh yeah, I know this kind of feeling of sitting on the roof with a low evening sun and having the smell of a barbecue and having some drinks. So the tactile quality of the image is important, that it's like an experience, and that through this experience you can sense an emotion. And I also, when I'm directing, for example, like when I was directing my last film, there was a kind of farewell scene between a man and his wife. And it's a film without dialogue, so all the emotion is in the small gestures. And I was really involved. I'm also not a kind of director that starts shouting on the set, so I'm very calm, and I try to communicate on a very human level with the people involved, and try to create a mood which is authentic, despite the fact that a video is a construction. Of course, it's a setup. It's staged. It's a created situation. It's not a real situation, but I try to find authenticity in the fakeness. So I try to create something that becomes credible. So I think it's also important to have to think about the ethical side of what you're doing. Is it politically correct to, as someone deriving from a middle class surrounding, you know, my parents were teachers, and is it correct to go to the slums of a city and to make pictures? And it's a question, I think, which is okay to pose. It's an understandable question, because I also don't like, let's say, the journalistic photography that quite often is kind of exploiting poverty or harsh or rough and difficult situations. But in this case, I really think it's not about doing something which is ethically wrong. I think almost on the contrary. There's no abuse of a situation. There's no wrong use of people's situation. I think the image is very respectful and low-key. And it's not paternalizing. It's the situation I staged with them is what actually could really take place on the roof if they'd have a celebration. But it's also the way I would approach it, to have some beers and some some food and a barbecue. So it's not, there's no tragic side to it whatsoever. It's just a beautiful, simple, straightforward family gathering, and it's extremely banal at the same time. It's not spectacular. It's very normal. It's an incredibly normal situation. I think if you watch the film I produced, or the tableau vivant, the living photograph I produced with them, there is no heaviness in that image. It's a very light and banal and nice image that at the same time communicates a lot about how people organize themselves, how we stage our surroundings and our lives. And I think to their advantage, the things that are happening or taking place on their roof is just very nice and cozy and warm and very human as well. So the slums that 10 years ago were still improvised pieces of leftovers of construction materials, now they really start to produce volumes that sculpturally are very beautiful architectural shapes. And so in the foreplan of the video I produced in the slums, you see that they're really moving on and they're organizing themselves as a very organic city where the life is enrolling itself in the streets rather than inside of the houses, because in the backdrop you see all these skyscrapers of modern and postmodern skyscrapers of Buenos Aires that are very replaceable by others, let's say from Brussels or Singapore or all over the world, or Dubai. They all kind of look impersonal and kind of look the same. It's buildings of banking companies and things like that in the backdrop. And yeah, it's office buildings, and they have something very sterile about them. And so they highly contrast with the very organic and warm life that is going on in the foreplan of the video. And yeah, so there was so few questions during this production. It all went very organically and easy. And that was maybe the most remarkable thing of it all. Like we had some security people over there, but I never had the feeling that there was any need for that, because it was so easygoing. And now I very much look forward to having the family coming over to the museum and to watch this kind of very contemporary scene, which is Argentinian, but at the same time is a story of all metropolitan cities around the world.